Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here in the lobby of Art Basel and have a conversation with Lucy Skaer, whose exhibition entitled "A Boat Used as a Vessel" is at the moment on view at Kunsthalle Basel. So you still have a chance, those of you who haven't yet seen it, to see it in the next 2 or 3 days. Since we don't have images at hand that could help us to talk about Lucy's works, I thought it would be a good idea to perhaps consider an exhibition also as a sequence of titles of different works that follow in the show, and try to somehow bring the exhibition into some sort of presence through looking at titles or trying to read some of very intriguing titles that Lucy Skaer gave to her works. And the first one is a group of 6 monoprints and a table between them, title of which piece is Fabrication. And I wanted to ask you about the meaning of this word fabrication and the double meaning, I suppose, or at least the double meaning, since on one hand the fabrication seemed to be referring to the physical process of making that has certain importance in your work or in your working method. On the other hand, it may indicate fabrication of an evidence, for instance. So I wanted to ask you about the relationship between this physical process of making, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the ways the meaning is made in your work, and how these two come together.
Yeah, the title Fabrication was actually a title that came quite late in the making of the work, and while I was making it, I was thinking about it being titled The Table and Lies About It, so very much more to do with a kind of fabrication as in a making up or an inventing. The idea of, I suppose, fabrication in that very kind of literal way that the images are made. The table is covered in ink, and then a piece of paper is put on top and then rubbed down and peeled off. And what I wanted to do is combine that kind of very direct way of making an image with anomalies and lies. In that sometimes only parts of the table are printed, and sometimes there are other elements like a bar that's drawn and kind of painted on over the top that doesn't relate to anything physical on the table. And then the whole of the sequence of prints is kind of made into a sentence by the inclusion of a comma and a full stop. So that's the way that it's also a kind of contrived language.
Of course, I was asking myself to what extent an artwork or an exhibition, which is always a certain sequence or group of artworks, can be in any way compared to a sentence or to a text. And I think that there are certain limits to this comparison, which you also make evident in your work. I mean, by the fact that you include a comma and the full stop or a dot in the work that you kind of imprinted over the print made directly from the table, you seem to indicate certain general relation that this work may have to the language structure, but nevertheless it doesn't yet make it as a sentence as such. So it's like a sentence, but it's an image. It's an image of something.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's the reason that I wanted to make it like a sentence was to make it more palpably mute or not saying anything, because as soon as it is posed as these things saying words, they become more inarticulate. So the whole of that work, I wanted to kind of physicalize the process of reading, and to kind of emphasize the muteness of these prints. That the only marks that you actually see on them that are from the table are these kind of scratches and dents and accidental kind of marks that I also felt maybe read as like the kind of scratches on the leader of a film, or somehow. Yes, they're a kind of mute. They're a kind of mute series of accidental marks.
Yeah, but the image that is produced, or the image that results, is to an extent random. It's more the general form that you have certain control over.
Yeah.
That one of the table. The second group of works in this room is remained untitled, and this group consists of 6 wooden triangles placed on the floor and 2 large drawings or prints, actually, on the wall. And these prints, in these prints, you enlarged images found in the newspaper photographs of theater plays. Could you say something about this relation to theatricality, or was it important as a reference to the convention of theater in general, or was it more important as a reference to a specific theater play?
Yeah, my interest in those images is more just how they function as pictures. That when you see them, you understand that the gestures are very readable, but they're readable because they're so contrived and so exaggerated, and also that there's a kind of tableau created for you to see from only one kind of viewpoint. So my interest is more in them as just photographs rather than actually as plays, or which is why I haven't kind of specified what the play is from. I mean, what the photograph is, which performance it's from, or anything like that. I think that those pictures operate in a very specific way. That they act themselves out, but they also reveal their artifice and their constructed nature. And in this installation, I'm using them to almost obliterate or screen out these graphic shapes, these graphic triangles.
In the following room, the next work is a sculpture or a series of small group of small sculptures entitled "Solid Ground, Liquid to Solid in 85 Years," and these are the 3-dimensional prints. Actually, the print can be 3-dimensional, and I think that the fact that there exists something like a 3-dimensional print must have been another reason why you went for this technique, because there is something strangely perverse in the fact that you can actually print a physical thing. So that seemed to be this rather crucial moment in your work, which is that it seems to be always balancing on this border between it being only a sign or something that sends us or sends our thinking towards something remote, like a referent, and at the same time the presence of a concrete material thing that seems to be at the same time the carrier of meaning and the meaning or the thing itself, right? So that seems to be the case with the sculpture Liquid to Solid in 85 Years, which is the prints of the original Rorschach tests that were forms whose precise reason for being was to be interpreted. There seems to be no other purpose for Rorschach blots than to be read and interpreted. And I guess that this was why you reached for them and turned them into three-dimensional sculptures. Could you perhaps say something about how this work came about and how you got at the idea of printing the Rorschach tests?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'd been interested in them just as things for a long time because they seem to flip up this idea of interpretation in that they're used to observe and read the viewer of them. And then the idea to actually make them three-dimensional was quite just a literal idea that they themselves are kind of renowned for not having any actual physical basis. Like they're meant to be this kind of thing that actually refers to nothing, that is just used to generate and recall other images. So I think the reason first that I wanted to make them is just somehow to undermine or obliterate these original Rorschach tests. But also the idea that they'd been, just the process that they'd originally been, how they'd been made, that this liquid had been thrown on a page and then the page had been folded. My gesture then seemed to be quite a kind of in keeping with that I just turned them on 360 degrees and made them solid.
In the same room, there is a display case in which you present a number of small paper models that, as you explain, were loosely based on models for an exhibition by another artist, into which you put, or in which you installed some very small works made sometimes of very precious and sometimes of less precious materials, such as gold or iron. Could you say something about the meaning of this small display of objects that seem to be located more or less in the central sort of pivotal point of the exhibition for its relation to other works in the show?
Yeah, I wanted to make a kind of a point in the middle of the exhibition that was like a kind of pool of ideas or something that was more kind of mutable in the show. And I made these models that were kind of originally inspired by the models for Rothko's Seagram murals. And what I wanted to do is kind of put in these small objects that I'd made from metal. There's matches and chrysalises and teeth and all of these kind of things that are of their original scale, but by putting them in these rooms they could become either maquettes for giant versions of themselves, or they could become like almost like a kind of coinage or like a barter system.
Some goods to be exchanged. Or
Yeah, some kind of solidity. Because, sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
together in that kind of vitrine in the center of the show, inside the models there are also these banknotes, or my version of banknotes, that are images that I selected and then worked with banknote designers to use their kind of secure processes of printing and their software that makes very kind of minute, dense marks. And I like the idea that those notes, I mean, when you normally have a banknote, you don't read the image in a straightforward way at all. It's just the image is on the banknote to be to prove its validity only. It's not relevant to what you might use it for. Or, so I wanted to kind of use that ambiguity and put it inside these architectural models, so that the banknotes may be just tokens for something that you could exchange, or they may be maquettes for my drawings or for larger works.
And the choice of 3 motifs for the banknote prints, the one of the Ship of Fools and the other one of a photograph by Robert Capa from the Spanish Civil War, but one of the, I suppose, lesser known photographs, or not the iconic one that more or less everyone knows. And the third one is the man of Tollund, the man found under the glacier. How do you connect these 3 images or objects? And in this one work, they seem to coming from very different times and from very different registers.
Yeah. It's almost like I kind of chose them for those, the way they're kind of completely diverse as images. The Robert Capa image is a very kind of fleeting moment. It's quite a blurred image that's not particularly kind of focused or composed, and it seems like a kind of real capturing of an instant, and that seems very in conflict to the way that it's then made and printed and constructed. And the Tollund man he's a, I suppose he's now an artifact. He was a body, but he's something that I've been fascinated with for a long time. In a way that I feel like he's this kind of pre-existing image or a kind of fusion between body and artifact. And the Ship of Fools is I think it's interesting because it's such a kind of complete allegory. But really they're quite diverse, and I didn't want in that work to kind of form a very solid sense of meaning between those images. I didn't want it to become readable as like a narrative or that those things were particularly symbolic even.
Yeah, and in the following room, you're showing the very short film loop with the title Leonora The Joker, which is a kind of partial portrayal of an artist, painter, Leonora Carrington, and who's living in Mexico City and who was 95-year-old at the moment when you met her and interviewed her. And the fact that you chose her as a protagonist of your film makes me again think about what you said about a way of looking at a human being as a sort of material proof or leftover or something that sort of comes to us from the past. In the case of the Man of Tollund is very direct because he's been sort of killed and preserved and frozen and transported to our time from a very different time, but I sense a similar intention behind your approaching in an almost anthropological way Leonora Carrington, because you're sort of interviewing her, but you did use fragments of what she said in another context, presenting a text or a report from the meeting that you had, but in this film there is no dialogue. The film is silent, and Leonora is trying to perhaps articulate something once or twice or address the viewer, but then again this attempt at communicating something is cut, is stopped.
Yeah, I think that, I did approach going to meet Leonora very much in that way, that she is She seems like someone from a completely different era, and from a different kind of art tradition. That seems quite strange that we could actually be producing art at the same time even. So I did go to meet her just with the idea of making a work that simply recorded that meeting, that wasn't about the content of that meeting or any of her history necessarily, but just was this this kind of document of her presence.
So it was more about meeting someone whose life sort of spans across like different historical eras, even perhaps.
Yeah, and that overlaps with my own.
Right. The next room is featuring two large drawings of a whale skeleton, and also there is an installation with a skeleton of a whale, and it is entitled Leviathan Edge. And again, there is a reference to the sort of semi-mythical creature Leviathan, juxtaposed with this almost like natural historical display of a very concrete and scientifically reconstructed skeleton of the whale, which has nothing to do with the mythical animal, or perhaps it has something to do with it. So I wanted to ask you about this this presence of a mythical creature in the title versus a rather materialistic take on the whale in the installation.
Yeah, I think the more that I think about whales, the more like alien and strange that they seem. But what I was interested in initially when I did the first drawing of the whale was some kind of idea of an encounter between myself and a whale, as it would be swimming past you in some kind of deep sea setting, and just the kind of strangeness that encounter is somehow possible in the world. And so the first drawing that I did, I wanted to somehow try to translate that sensation of a whale passing. But of course I'm using a skeleton of the whale, so I'm kind of playing with that idea of classification and what the kind of very rational way that species are separated from each other, and that kind of quite precise, particular scientific language. So in the installation, I think I'm interested in maybe suppressing the natural history kind of classification reading of the whale by obliterating the view of it, so that you see it in kind of in glimpses, maybe in a more kind of irrational way that I think is more akin to the idea of actually kind of confronting a whale.
Right, but at the same time, the way you made these drawings has nothing to do with this sort of momentary sensation or seeing something in the glimpse. So it seems that you invested quite a lot in the drawing that is supposed to evoke a very short moment that passes, but at the same time, the way the drawing is almost obsessively made of very tiny spirals that are then in turn filled with marks of the pencil, seems to indicate rather a very long and very laborious process.
Yeah, the process is not at all like a glimpse or a glance, but I think that the experience of looking at the drawing maybe is, that the image reveals and then it submerges, and it doesn't, maybe at no point does it kind of fully reveal itself. So the reason that I made them in that way is so that they have a particular kind of confrontation with the viewer.
Right. I was extremely happy to see the way you presented the whale skeleton as part of the installation at the Kunsthalle, because when you first came up with this idea of having an actual skeleton loaned from the Natural History Museum in Basel, I could imagine reading the reaction of the press and also the visitors who might hear that there's going to be a sensation, which is a whale on display, and it of course the whale skeleton or bones of the whale are typical curiosities. I mean, there is a tradition of presenting them since centuries as found objects, perhaps bones of a Leviathan in churches or in private collections and so forth. And you're bringing now this kind of dusty curiosity into a contemporary art exhibition, and I thought that this might totally sensationalize the perception of the exhibition, and that the show would be then, before it opens, reduced to the fact, well, they have a whale at the Kunsthalle, let's go see it. And then what you did, you installed these white screens that basically totally, blocked the whale from view and turn the viewers into those who are seeking sensation. So you kind of force them into a pretty uncomfortable position, but with a certain sense of humor too, I think. And then again, like in many previous works, you yourself used this word already quite a few times, the obliteration. It seems quite important for you how things are removed from view, or from the they are no longer in the reach, within the reach of the viewer or visitor.
Yeah, I think maybe the point of at which I want the work to be is that point of looking and interpretation and confronting this thing as a system of language or as at the point of trying to read it. And I think that kind of obliteration is a tactic to keep the viewing at that point, to kind of freeze it at that moment. So yeah, if I had the whole whale there, it would be so readable and so interpretable that it would just blow away the rest of the show. I mean, in order to have that whale even in the show, I had to
remove
screen it. Yeah, to remove it and to remove sections of it. But also I think that putting that whale in the room in that way is a way to understand its bigness in quite a human proportion. Like it's also to do with the size that a whale would take up in a room.
Well, it's a whale which in German is called a dwarf whale.
Damn.
Meaning it's apparently a very small whale, but it's anyway quite huge. The last work, the work in the last room of your exhibition is entitled "The Siege," Die Belagerung, and it's an installation that was commissioned for one of your previous exhibitions in the UK. And well, the first thing we hit upon entering the room is a grey wall that is slightly curved, and then we turn around on the corner of this wall, and then we enter this kind of, I dare say, landscape. And there is the whole installation is composed in a way as a landscape, or perhaps it's like a cargo of a ship that was sort of stranded on the shore of the sea. It strongly has this feeling of a collection of objects that are scattered within a certain limited space, and you As we were talking about the meaning of the term the siege, in this installation you mentioned that for you the siege, and I kind of like this way of reducing it to economy of the siege and not the drama of the siege. So what it means for those who are besieged and for those who besiege. You said that it's a situation in which one has to deal with very limited resources or means over probably limited but unknown period of time. And I think you know the very word in connection with the fact that the first thing we see is the wall that doesn't allow us to see anything creates already a pretty tense situation at the point when one enters the room. Could you say something about the cast of objects that you collected as protagonists within the siege?
Yeah, some of them are quite kind of, I suppose, of a domestic scale. There are these tables that I've made that again print images, but I think everything inside the siege can be either fuel, or it can be protagonist, or it's somehow kind of mutable in that way. You also see these replicas of Brancusi's bird in space that I've made out of coal dust. And through Brancusi's lifespan, he made 26 of them. So I've made kind of 26 identical versions that then, I mean, they feel a bit like they might be protagonists, or they might be weapons, or they might be fuel. So it's this kind of using the abstract nature of the original sculpture almost to then thwart that abstraction into being this kind of mutability or something.
Yeah, but then you also, in this way, kind of show that the alphabet, I mean, you transform the alphabet into something that is strangely mute, because the alphabet is based on differences, and you reduce the difference. I mean, if we are to take the collection of 26 identical objects as alphabet, that means that we cannot speak, because the alphabet is not based, I mean, this alphabet is not based on any idea of difference. It's based on the idea of sameness. There is no way to build up a word and build up, you know, language out of it. That is kind of striking, and I sort of strongly opposed this title in the very beginning. I thought, like, well, it's not an alphabet, because alphabet is 26 different letters. Here we have 26 exactly the same sort of signs or letters, like same hieroglyphs. Then there is another work which you took from the painting, which is sort of borrowed or extracted from a painting by Paul Nash. And the painting is called The Landscape from a Dream, and your work is called The Screen from a Landscape. So you build this other step. So you sort of, while the object, the screen or paravent, is descending from the painting into the space, it also does it as if descending from the title of Paul Nash painting, sort of mutating into the title of your work. Could you say something about the reasons for making the reference specifically to this British surrealist painter?
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about the siege installation, Paul Nash was actually a kind of quite rare inspiration for me, in that I'm not usually inspired directly from artworks. I usually kind of maybe I'll take parts of them or use them, but the whole kind of gist of these Paul Nash paintings was really interesting to me at the time, and actually still is interesting. I'm making a film with a Paul Nash painting in it at the moment, but I think it's to do with the way that surrealism is used to kind of articulate a particular kind of social problem. I mean, in the way that his surrealism is used to articulate the kind of horrendousness of war in quite a kind of direct way, and that kind of using, I think he uses objects, and he kind of he removes them from their normal context, and places them so in a way that they're analogous, but they're not. I mean, it's not a kind of surrealism like a automatic writing or something. It's a very intended. Using something to mean something that it doesn't directly, so it's almost like a kind of symbolism. And
okay, so it's like more like a representation of a shattered life than a subjective, sort of dreamy narrative of exploration of somebody's mind. It's more like bringing together objects that once belonged to the world, that made sense, into a situation that suddenly goes completely out of control or out of context. Is this the way of sort of anticipating the war in his work, or?
I mean, I think it's a kind of reflection of the war, maybe, but he writes a lot about removing things from the ground in this essay Aerial Flowers that I've been looking at a lot, and he seems to want to take something from nature and literally like put it in the sky, so it no longer refers to the earth or to anything bodily. He wants to find freedom in casting that away from the earth, and he talks about that in terms of death, actually, just in terms of a kind of confrontation of death.
In the same room, we have 4 tables, from which you also made prints. And one of them is a print of a hand, and it's the hand of an artist too, which is an information that we get on demand from you, as you don't tell us that it's a hand of an important artist again, but one can sense it because there is a strong focus on the hands in the film that we've seen like 2 rooms before, the hands of Leonora Carrington. And perhaps I would like to close with asking you one last question, and then opening up perhaps to a short round of questions from the audience about this work in which you sort of with a hand, you made a print of a hand and carved the hand on the surface of a table. Could you comment on this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually it's the hand of Louise Bourgeois, and it's from a postcard that I was sent, and Louise Bourgeois' hand is actually lying over one of her drawings of her hand, so it's like even more more stages than just what you see. But in my installation I wanted there to be this kind of very strong presence of someone existing in the room. So I mean, that's why I'm not. I mean, it doesn't mean the same to me as the film of Carrington's hand. I mean, I'm just using that.
Right. No, I understand. I understand much better now, because in a sense you also use the existing artifact, which is like it seems that the hand of Louise Bourgeois has already been turned into an icon for certain pretty obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Because it's very photogenic or photogenous, and it's particularly suitable for to be photographed and made into a kind of curiosity or sensation, or where you no longer know what is like animate or inanimate object. Thank you very much, and perhaps we could take a few questions now, if there is any. Yes, there is one question.
Sorry, I hope you didn't really cover this yet, but I was curious how you chose the material of coal dust for the Brancusi piece. Why coal dust?
I wanted when I was initially thinking about about using the Brancusi shape. I wanted to make it cast it in a kind of exchangeable substance. So something that would have a, if you said how much is 10 kilos of coal, there would be a price. So when this maybe isn't so clear or obvious in the final kind of format that it's in now, but I was interested in kind of equating the abstract sculptural kind of nature of those Brancusis with some kind of market exchangeability or market value. And then within the siege, I wanted it to be both a kind of, to be actually a fuel, something that you could burn and convert to a certain amount of energy. So that's why I chose it. It turned out to be a complete nightmare to actually work with, but.
Okay. So thanks a lot for this conversation, and
Thanks.
enjoy the next conversation.